I'm not scared about AI.
I'm not scared about AI either.
Hey Richard, I have a perfectly dystopian idea. What if we let AI run the entire economy?
Like some sort of fully automated luxury communism.
Exactly. Like a perfectly electronic marketplace that is fully integrated in the society. Assuming, of course, that the tech companies haven't taken over the world already.
Well, it's funny you should mention that, because that's precisely the topic of today's video blog. Our guest is Ted Parson, Professor of Environmental Law at UCLA.
Hi, I'm Ted Parson. I'm a professor at the Law School at UCLA, and I am also the co-director of the Emmett Institute on Climate Change and the Environment. I am an odd duck in that I am a law professor who's never been to law school, and I'm half trained in 4 fields. My main interests are environment, energy, climate change, and the policy and regulatory issues around those. And in working on those issues, I became keenly interested in the role of technology, how technology serves social interests, how it sometimes goes against social interests, and the interaction between policy and regulatory and legal decision-making and technology. So my new interest and new project in AI and its societal impacts and governance is a lateral offshoot of my long-standing interest in technologies for their environmental implications. I've been running it jointly with my colleague Richard Ray for about 1 year, and the paper I'm discussing here is actually the first thing that I've written under this project.
In his most recent work, Ted has turned his attention towards the issue of AI, and whether it could master the kind of complex tasks that would be needed to run a thriving economy.
But before jumping into the paper, we asked Ted what inspired him to write about this topic in the first place, and why he decided to trace the link between AI and the economy.
I got interested in this originally from science fiction characterizations of societies in which AIs did everything for people. And then I ran across a couple of political references to a strange combination of contemporary political groups, some utopian technological visionaries from Silicon Valley and some old and new leftists from Britain and Southern Europe all talking about it, and I thought it was really interesting and worth a detailed, concrete exploration, even though it's wildly speculative.
So this is more than just dystopian sci-fi for the Uber generation.
Absolutely. In fact, in the paper, Ted talks about how the rise of AI gives a new life to a debate that defined the economic struggle between communism and capitalism throughout the 20th century.
So you mean it's like a post-Soviet cybernetic upgrade? But what's this debate really all about?
So it's all about central planning. In the first few decades of the 20th century, for many economists and political theorists, central planning represented a perfect solution to the excesses of the free market economy. In fact, the Soviet Union even based many of its governing principles around this core, simple idea. But supporters of the free market economy, like Friedrich Hayek, remained incredibly critical of central planning for 2 reasons. First, they argued that this was too much of an infringement on individual liberty. Second, they claimed that the state could never be competent enough to produce the kind of goods people wanted in the most efficient and productive manner.
Exactly. So the idea was that even if you had the most intelligent people running the economy, you would always have wasteful deficits or surpluses of the most desirable goods in the economy.
So Ted's paper considers both of these arguments, and bracketing off the first point, considers how the rise of AI might change the equation by introducing a super fast and super competent computer system that could calculate how to run the economy from a series of individual inputs.
So Richard, does this mean that AI is basically making the entire human management of the economy obsolete?
I mean, we have a market economy that is really not in many places characterized by the conditions of perfect competition that are necessary for the normative assumptions of social optimality. So there is market power all over the place, there are externalities all over the place, there are agency problems all over the place, there are lack of information and information asymmetries all over the place. The biggest reason that Max might do better than present arrangements arrangements is that Max would have the capability in principle to integrate all these things. And of course, you might also say that under Max, it isn't that there wouldn't be market power, it's that market power wouldn't matter, because the reason firms pursue market power is to extract rents. And if Max is controlling all the transactions, there's no way to capture rents. So Max would be optimizing on behalf of the whole society, while still allowing the decentralized information that mediates market transactions to occur among firms. Max would be nudging and adjusting at the margins, at least in the variant I'm currently thinking is the most promising.
So Max could make sure that the system runs perfectly, right? And I asked myself, what would that look like? Would it be some kind of iCommunism where you have different economic data points that are basically integrated into all of our devices?
Well, that's a tricky question, comrade, and it's one that forms the basis for this thought experiment. In fact, in the paper, Ted considers all the different ways that Max might work, and he points out that some of these might not work out very well at all. So if Max is integrated into every aspect of our lives, and if he's set to optimize certain outcomes, then he might turn out to be quite paternalistic. This would mean that he essentially prevents us from making unhealthy or undesirable lifestyle choices simply because they don't fit very well with this idea about what is important in running a complex, well-planned economy.
So it sounds like Max might have a little trouble understanding his consumers. Incorporating all economic externalities into his calculations might still not necessarily leave him understanding human behavior.
Yeah, and maybe it's not enough to understand what people want now. How does an AI like Max predict how tastes are going to change, and how does he respond to those changes without essentially telling people what they should buy, what they should make, what they should sell, in a very dictatorial manner?
That's a really good point.
Well, how good a job does Amazon do for you now in recommending books and other products that you might be interested in? How good a job does Yelp do at recommending restaurants to you? AI, even in its less advanced state at present, is actually doing a pretty good job of estimating and predicting tastes and preferences, even at the individual level. In running the whole economy, Max would be similar to these current functions in his, I call Max him for reasons I explain in the paper, in his prediction of consumer goods that you might be interested in purchasing. But the main advantage of Max is that Max would provide an opportunity to get the benefits of competitive markets, but also simultaneously correct all market imperfections, because Max would be considering externalities, market power, rent seeking. Now, you also asked about innovation. Obviously, I don't know the details. I'm speculating about a fictitious entity, and so I'm allowed to speculate pretty much without constraint. I want to say Max might do as good as or better a job at exploring potential innovations on the margin of current technological possibilities as human firms do. And Max might also do a good job of managing the explore-exploit frontier in terms of test marketing or trying things out on some people or suggesting things you haven't tried yet. And of course, Max would be continually updating with new data from every communication and every transaction. So, allowed to speculate freely, I'm going to speculate Max could do a pretty good job at this.
This paper is about opening up questions about what the economy is going to look like in the next 20, 50, or 100 years' time. We can't even imagine what things will look like in a century's time. However, thought experiments like this are really important, both in terms of addressing questions of the future and how things are going to be, but also in terms of bringing back issues that have been kind of really important in the last century into open economic debate.
I agree. I mean, I think Ted's work is really some frontier work that is pushing our imagination. But I always ask myself, what are the short-term implications of such work? And how can this really help us to address the current issues we're facing in the economy?
Well, actually, the short-term implications of this are a little hard to think through, because there's two questions raised by this work that are essentially impossible to answer. One of the impossible questions is, what is it that Max maximizes? What is the social objective function? competitive markets operate under a normative conception that is extraordinarily thin, only Pareto optimality, which means basically you can't find optima. You deem a huge number of arrangements to be optimal because of the incapability of universally agreed improvements. Max wouldn't have the luxury of relying on a conception so thin, so Max would have to actually define a social welfare function. So you ask, what is it? Does it care, for example, about social inequality, and if so, how much? And then the related, even harder question is, how on earth could people agree what that was? That's impossible question one. Impossible question two is, how on earth could this ever come about? And I have to say that the most obvious and incremental and continuous ways that something like this could come about don't look nice and socially optimal like my Max vision. They actually look rather dystopian rather than utopian, because they would arise from the expansion of present monopolists, using algorithmic decision-making internally to optimize and predict preferences, but to do it for their own benefit. So I would rather have Max than what a colleague of mine calls Bezos' world, which is one in which Amazon expands to be everything for everyone. Because of course, it would be optimizing, but it would be optimizing for Jeff Bezos. Now, maybe the feasible path toward Max is that you actually get Bezos' world, and then you have a revolution whereby some public institution like the state appropriates the algorithm and tweaks all the dials for social benefit. But that's a little implausible. Short answer is, I don't know how we would get there, but I think it's still an illuminating and interesting and informative thing to think through as a thought experiment.
The question of how AI would run the economy opens up a world of possibilities. But these are possibilities we should start thinking about and maybe even planning for today.
Well put, Richard, and thanks for being with us today. And for you out there, you know the drill. If you want to learn more about law and economics,
Hit the subscribe button below.